Welcome to our second night of the Helen Damico Memorial Lecture Series. I'm Justine Andrews, Director of the Institute of Community Studies, and I'm thrilled to have this amazing audience here tonight. Let's start with our foundation. In 1889, the University of New Mexico sits in the traditional homelands of the Pueblos India. The original peoples of New Mexico, Pueblo, Navajo, and Apache, since time immemorial, have deep connections to the land and have made significant contributions to the broader communities statewide. We honor the land itself and those who remain stewards of that land. Throughout the generations, and also acknowledge our committed relationship to Indigenous peoples, we gratefully recognize our history. And I think that's particularly important tonight to read the acknowledgement, lands territory acknowledgement here at UNM, because there is this deep Indigenous history here. And we as medieval historians, we dive deep into that same time period. So, you know, it bears kind of thinking about perhaps the connections or not. But I always like to start with that as an acknowledgement of the land that we are on and the history that we embody. As you know, our series is named in honor of Helen Damico. She was an incredible woman, professor of English here, of Old Norse and Old English. She was the founder of our institute and of this series in, I believe, 1988. And sadly, she passed away of COVID in 2020. So we have renamed our long-running spring lecture series in her honor. So this is the second year running as a Helen Damico Memorial Lecture Series. And I'm so proud to be able to present that to you, although it's our 36th spring lecture series for the Institute, founded by Helen. This year's series is made possible by a National Endowment for the Humanities American Rescue Plan grant through the New Mexico Humanities Council. So we're deeply grateful to them for sponsoring us. And in addition, there are so many people I'd like to thank, including Helen Damico's family, for establishing a fund. And many people have asked about donating to the Institute, and I'm grateful for that kind of support. There is information at the front of the doors there for how to do that, either in paper form or if you're savvy with your phone, there's a QR code that will lead you right to the donation pages online. So thank you so much for your support just by being here and helping us continue this series and other projects that we have through the Institute. One thing we do is offer scholarships to our graduate students and undergraduates. And we also try to bring events like works in progress lectures, and of course our visiting Scandinavian scholars. This semester we have Dr. Terry Gummel with us. Thank you so much for being with us from Iceland, and things like that. So you know, thank you for your support and allowing us to do all these tremendous things here on campus and outreaching to the rest of you in Albuquerque and beyond. And I thank all the colleges and all the departments that we are connected to. I want to especially thank our home departments. I don't know if all of you understand how the faculty who are connected to the Institute, each have a home department, right? We're hired into English, history, art history, the Honors College, music. Yeah, in music, there's a professor of music who does medieval music, although this year we don't have a musical component. And then we come together as a real interdisciplinary group to work on these projects, events, scholarships, and to support and mentor our students. So I want to thank all of those department chairs and colleges that support us as an institute. This year, the theme of our lecture series is Re-Envisioning the Middle Ages. I mentioned last time that medieval studies, like a lot of fields in academia, is really at, like many people, are at this kind of crossroads of thinking, reviewing, understanding our history as a field. And in doing so, we, both as historians, re-envision the past, but we also think about how medieval persons would see their own past. So that's kind of the broad theme of this lecture series. And we're seeing it from a number of different angles from 4 outstanding scholars of the Middle Ages. So tonight is our second wonderful speaker. The last thing I will say before I have Dr. David Secord introduce our speaker is to, if you can, turn off or mute your phones. I laugh because if you were here last night, my phone went off quite dramatically. And then as time allows, we hope that we have some time for questions at the end. Thank you. I want to correct, so there were many interesting things happening this year with changes, last minute changes, like we had a speaker who couldn't come, and then we had this amazing speaker who took his place. And our speaker for tomorrow night, Wednesday night, Matthew Berman, I do want to mention, originally he was not going to be able to come to New Mexico. And we were going to be very hybrid savvy, computery, and bring him here through Zoom. But guess what? He's coming. He's going to show up tomorrow afternoon, being the jet-setting historian that he is, a literature person, and he's going to come and actually be here. So please come tomorrow at 6 for Matthew's talk. But tonight we have the incredible Dr. Paxton, who Sarah Davis Secord will gratefully introduce.
Thank you. Okay, I'm seeing thumbs up. It is so great to be here in person with you all, and it is so exciting to be back live for the first in person of the Helen Damico Memorial Spring Lecture Series. Many of you knew Helen a lot more time and better than I did, but one of the things that I always think back when I think about my time with Helen is I think about her generosity as a person. She was so generous to me and to my whole family, actually, and her enthusiasm for all things medieval. And those two characteristics of generosity and enthusiasm are also characteristics that I associate with tonight's speaker, Dr. Frederick Paxton. I met Fred a couple of years ago at a conference when some co-authors of mine and I were doing a panel discussion about how we were writing a text about the global Middle Ages. And afterwards, Fred came up and introduced himself and excitedly talked to us, really what turned out to be for hours, about our shared interest in broadening the scope of what the medieval can be. And in fact, he didn't actually went out to a bar with us and bought the first round of drinks. So very generous. He's also continued that generosity intellectually by reading things and giving me feedback and keeping in contact in our discussions about this global pre-modern. So I'm really excited to introduce to you tonight Dr. Frederick Paxton, who is the Brigadier Pakiani Ardengi Professor of History at Connecticut College, where he has taught since 1985, which is also the year in which he received his PhD from the University of California at Berkeley. And in those many years, he has taught a range of classes at what they call Conn College. I know that because my mother-in-law used to work there. So at Conn College, he has taught up to 30 different types of classes on medieval spirituality, monasticism, medieval law, health and sickness, and death and dying, which are the topics of 2 of the 4 books that he has published. The first was called Christianizing Death from 1990, and another is called The Death Ritual at Cluny in the Central Middle Ages from 2013. He has also published a wide range of articles, book chapters, you name it, right? He is also astoundingly the recipient of effectively every fellowship you have ever heard of for the humanities. I'm serious. The ACLS, the NEH. He's been a fellow at the Institute for the Advanced Study, Mellon, Fulbright, the Carmago Foundation. I'm sure I've forgotten some because there are so many. And he, in addition to these early works about death and dying and sickness, he is now turning to, as I said, this project of kind of reimagining what the medieval can be. And that is the subject of tonight's talk, The American Medieval Southwest, which is also the subject of a book that he is currently working on, thinking of the ways that we can think about what are traditionally thought of as the European Middle Ages here in the places where we are now. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Fred Paxton.
I don't know that. All right, so some 25 years ago, while driving to see my mother, who had moved from Detroit to Prescott, Arizona, I stopped at Montezuma Castle National Monument. At the time, an interpretive sign with an image of a Gothic cathedral indicated that both it and the cliff dwelling had been constructed in the 13th century. It made me wonder, why did I know so much about medieval Europe and virtually nothing about the Middle Ages in my own?
Sorry.
Should we do it with this? In my own country. After seeing my most recent book project into print, I decided it was time to find out, at least for the Southwest. And in 2010, I embarked on the first of 5 yearly trips, crisscrossing the region from Tucson to Taos and the Four Corners to Gran Cudera, visiting museums, including, of course, the Maxwell, getting to know and even work with some of the archaeologists who are the real experts in the field, and visiting most every site with remains from the medieval centuries that is publicly accessible. Yet nothing I read or saw referred to the period as medieval. Now, Southwestern archaeologists used to refer to the period and the people they study as prehistoric. And apparently, so does the Maxwell Museum, I was in there today, and all the signs talk about these prehistoric people. The reason for that is when history and archaeology emerged as academic fields in the late 19th century, history was defined by the rigorous analysis of written documents, and archaeology was defined by the rigorous analysis of the human and other remains of people who didn't have written language. It made sense at the time. It doesn't make sense anymore. As you can see, 3 of what I think are the best introductions to the subject written for general audience, and the book that I'm hoping to finish and get published is written for a general audience as well. And if I see, as you see, Stephen Clark, John Kantner, and Steve Lexon, even though Lexon is the most historically minded of Southwestern archaeologists, notice his title. It's a history of the ancient Southwest. So that's good. And his last book is in fact a coup de coeur to his colleagues to write history with archaeological findings. I'm not sure what Steve feels about me sort of answering his call from the other side of the aisle, but that's where it stands at this point. Now, the basic periodization for world history is, of course, medieval, ancient, medieval, and modern. And historians regularly refer these days to medieval Islam, medieval Japan, medieval China, India, and even Africa. But almost no one uses it for America, except an American historian named Daniel Richter, who on the cover of his book says ancient, but when you get into the chapters, he talks about the medieval, which is very interesting. And Tim Pawcatack, who wrote a book on Hohokam, is an archaeologist at the University of Illinois, also professor of medieval studies. But that's about it. Consider this depiction of the first encounter between the native peoples of the Southwest. A little bit of my notes has disappeared, with the way things are set up. Let me just see if I can move this. But not all the time. Here we go. Okay, consider this depiction of the first encounter of Europeans and the Native Americans, a wonderful painting by this William Hartman. Were the people on the right side of this image living in the early modern period? It's the year 1540, after all. And those the people of Zuni on the left were living in the ancient world? Not at all. It doesn't make any sense. If I move something, seems to change. If history has to be about people, then it would make sense to begin with the history of the first people to inhabit the land. But because indigenous peoples have always had a deep sense of being of and from the land, I think it makes sense to begin with the tectonic forces that created this southwestern landscape, that lifted the Colorado Plateau, created the basin and range province with its sky islands and its verdant deserts, especially the Sonora. Followed then by the history of the first people to live here and the slow transition from hunting and gathering to full-time farming. The fact that transition occurred across the Southwest around 500 CE makes the use of the chronological marker of the early Middle Ages all the more appropriate. The Southwest, as I'm sure you all know, is bounded by the Rocky Mountains in the north, the Colorado River in the west, the Rio Grande in the east, and in the south, the Sonora and Chihuahua deserts link it to Mesoamerica. Farming spread around the region because, as dry as it is, the tributaries of the main rivers, like the Little Colorado, the San Juan, and the Salton Gila, always have brought lots of water to the deserts, and seasonal rains make dry farming possible on the plateau. If you can, you have a nice look at that. It's also a wonderful map for showing all of these, all of these national monuments and sites all through here. These are all places that present of life and activity of amazing complexity and interest that in the medieval centuries. And I have been driving around and visiting all of these places. Let me just put this down a little bit. Can you still hear me? Well, or did I disappeared?
You're fine.
Yeah, that's fine? Oh, excellent. Good.
Focus is up.
What is too bad?
Focus.
Oh, yeah, that's just the size of the screen. I'm sorry. I wish it were.
Talk a little louder for us up here.
Okay, well, let me put this back up again. Hello? How's that? Okay, maybe we won't get feedback. Yeah, so we'll go to the next slide. This is probably familiar to most of you as well. There were three main groups of people during the Middle Ages in the Southwest: the ancestral Pueblo of the Colorado Plateau, the people who lived in the mountains below the Mogollon Rim, who have unfortunately inherited the name of an early Spanish governor of New Mexico, and the Hohokam of the Sonora Desert. As I tried to get a big picture of their histories, though, I found myself constantly losing my bearings. Because as you can see from this chart, while the anthropologists use the standard chronology here, when they look at the different areas across the Southwest, they have a whole series of different periods that they use. And if you're a specialist in the Hohokam, for example, you refer to the colonial and the sedentary and these other things. And so as reading all these things, I found it really hard to line things up in a chronological order to tell a seamless story. As it turns out, using the standard periodization from medieval Europe simultaneously simplifies things and reveals similarities in human experience in the Southwest and Europe. I've already mentioned the reason for placing the beginning of the early Middle Ages at the year 500. The reason for the rapid growth in the Central Middle Ages, as well as the crisis that marks the transition to the later Middle Ages, is climate change. Now, climate charts can be hard to interpret, so let's take a moment to absorb the trends that this one shows. You can see that it is focused on the medieval warm period. The gray lines are individual readings of temperatures in different areas of the Northern Hemisphere over time. The colored lines show a smoothed out average. Blue areas highlight downturns into colder periods. Black highlights upturns into warmer periods, and red marks the warmest period of all. Since Europe and the American Southwest were both agrarian civilizations, they were highly sensitive to climate change. Warmer temperatures meant longer growing seasons and bigger harvests, which supported more people, that created more labor and more harvests and so on. Going back to the chart again. No, I'm sorry. Shouldn't have done that. The medieval warm period fueled the rapid growth of the Central Middle Ages in both Europe and the Southwest. And the deep downward turn at the end of the 13th century led to the great migration of the Pueblo people from the Four Corners. At the same time in Europe, it led to the Great Famine in the years 1317 and left a highly vulnerable population in place when the Black Death hit Europe and the Afro-Eurasian world in the middle of that century. As far as the reorganization goes, those subsequent reorganizations were different, and of course, in many ways, because of the differences between Europe, Western Europe, and the Southwest. They were themselves, however, helped along by this little upturn here in the 14th century, enough to stabilize things, enough to sort of make the futures more positive as it turned out, before that so-called little ice age began. And scientists will tell us that if you look at the big picture of climate change over the last 2 million years or so, the trend should have been down into an ice age here. We're ready for one every 100,000, 200,000 years or so. It's a real pattern in the data, and it's, of course, we know the reasons why that went in the opposite direction. That's where we are today. All this lays the foundation, I think, for a history of the North American Southwest in the Middle Ages. It's too vast a subject to cover in such a short presentation. But if you focus on the three rivers, the three environments of the plateau, the deserts, and the uplands between, and the three populations of Hohokam, Pueblo, and Mogollon, that gives you a framework. And in particular, then you have what we see in the Hohokam world is a kind of stability, what the experts call the Hohokam millennium. It's 1,000 years of agricultural society in the Sonoran Desert without any real eruptions until the later Middle Ages. And a recent book on Pueblo people has pointed out that movement and migration is at the core of their experience. And so when people talk about them disappearing from certain places, that's never the case. They don't disappear. They simply moved from one place to another as they dealt with the changes, the sensitive changes that the environment on the high plateau confronted them with. And then the Mogollon play a role in between, making connections between Mesoamerica and the Pueblo North, connections between the Hohokam heartlands and the highlands themselves, as you'll see as we move along. So in the following, I'll give you some snapshots of what that medieval history looks like, and hope that it'll give you a sense of change and continuity from the 6th to the 16th century, and perhaps whet your appetite for more. So let's start with the early Middle Ages, around the year 500 CE. And let me just say again, if it isn't clear, all the data that I'm using is data that came from archaeologists. This reading archaeology, visiting these sites, and then put it together. So, and you know, there are 5 generations of archaeologists in this territory. Many of you probably know that tree ring dating was invented here in the Southwest, and it's one of the most, outside of Egypt, it's the most archaeologically researched place on the planet. And it just so happens that the most knowledge that is accumulated is from the period that we think of as the Middle Ages, the medievalists. So around 500 CE, a group of migrants joined the people already living in a small settlement of some 5 to 10 households along the Santa Cruz River in the Tucson Basin. Their arrival doubled the size of the community, creating one of the earliest agricultural villages in the Southwest and the beginning of the Hohokam. The original inhabitants marked the arrival of the newcomers by building a communal plaza. The people of the village, dubbed Valencia Vieja by the archaeologists who found it, were raising a new and more nutritious strain of corn, known as maize de ocho, for its 8 rows of curls, which led to a population increase. They were also playing a form of the Mesoamerican ball game, but without a ball court. The native peoples of the Tucson Basin had independently invented irrigation farming. It was first invented in Afro-Eurasia, in Mesopotamia, and it was independently invented here in the Southwest. And it was done down in the Tucson Basin, but the future of the Hohokam lay in the Phoenix Basin, where the more abundant waters of the Gila and the Salt led to the emergence of agrarian civilization in the Southwest, via the construction of a vast system of canals, eventually irrigating some 110,000 acres with only human labor and tools of stone, bone, wood, and sinew. Let's look at just one early medieval site known as Snaketown on the Gila. This is an image of the excavations that were done in the 1930s. And you can get, at least even with the blurry image, I'm afraid, but you get a sense of its size and the complexity of its layout. This next slide is also maybe a bit hard to read, but it's nice and big. But it shows not just canals branching off from the Gila, of course, which is along here in the floodplain, and roads going north from the Snaketown itself. And there's a ball court up here, so they're playing them as an American ball game, performing it with ball courts. This down here are called the Gila Buttes. The Hohokam of Snaketown mined micaceous schist there at these buttes, which they used to temper their pottery and give it a special sparkling quality. Hohokam ceramics are not as famous as those of the Mimbres Molion, but is certainly as beautiful and as representative of the level of their civilization. These wonderful images with animal life and bird life, and this, especially the central image here, which shows, again, without, the hunter-gatherers, as many of you know, came into North America and pretty much wiped out most of the megafauna. And so the horses which evolved in North America disappeared entirely. And so these are people without any beast of burden at all. And so they had these images of them, these porters bringing goods from one place to another across the Hohokam world. The early medieval Hohokam also used schist to make tablets in their death rituals. They placed the tablets on top of funeral pyres and sprinkled a combination of minerals that created a phosphorescent display when they heated that may have meant to help or represent the transition from this world to the next. Of course, we don't know what they thought because they didn't write things down, and so we don't have that kind of data. But again, it doesn't mean that this is indicative of people of a high level of civilization. Along with such rituals, early medieval Hohokam used ball courts and the markets that accompanied the games that were played there to organize their society. And along with the wearing of shell bracelets and other cultural markers that are part of what Steve Lexon called the Hohokam canon. And you can see each one of these little dots represents ball carts. This is most of Arizona. You see, this is an amazing cultural, so, it's not a cultural zone, it's, I would argue, a civilization in itself. People in the Mogollon Highlands lived in pit houses like everyone else. I didn't show pit houses for the Hohokam, but that's what everyone lived in. And at this time, it was down the plateau as well. That houses were sunken to a certain extent on the ground. But they only settled down to full-time farming when the cultivation of maize, the ocho, finally raised birth rates to the point where competition for wild plants and game forced them to. If you've been in the, I'm sure you have in the mountains, they are quite extensive and were filled with game. So it wasn't necessary to farm until the population grew. The major change that came to the highlands in the early Middle Ages was the spread of the Hohokam up into places like the Tonto and Sanford basins here, where they integrated with the local population, bringing not so many ball courts, but bringing irrigation, agriculture, and the other marks of the Hohokam people. And they spread not by conquest, but by simply moving in and working with local people. And we've defined civilization almost entirely around the notion of warfare and slavery and patriarchy, all of these things that emerge in Mesopotamia and those places. And so I find it stunning that while there's violence in the Southwest and many books on war in the Southwest, it's not as if these people were just wonderful, but you don't have people conquering their neighbors and enslaving them to help you grow as a society or as a civilization. The Hohokam spread far enough, though, to pass on irrigation farming to people on the Mibris River Valley on the other side of the Continental Divide here in New Mexico. The Mibris are, of course, best known for the pottery, which was so sought after in the first half of the 20th century that pot hunters destroyed most of the remains of their villages and towns. Nevertheless, they played a key role in mediating the trade in scarlet macaws and other desirable objects from Mesoamerica to Chaco Canyon, as well as epics like the Mayan Popol Vuh and devotion to the rain god Tlaloc, who appears in later religious life in the late Middle Ages in the Pueblo world. The figures in the bowl on the upper left illustrate a story, actually the story that ends the Popol Vuh. The twin hero brothers, who are critical to the story, trick the lords of death into thinking that they can resuscitate them. They then kill the lords, but do not bring them back to life, opening the way for humans to enter this world. The twins then become the sun and the moon. About the same time when that Valencia Vieja was founded, a group of people on the Colorado Plateau were settling on a mesa overlooking Chaco Canyon in the San Juan Basin. Known by the Navajo name Shabakchi, the community was about 5 times larger than any other on the plateau. It also seems to have included families with bigger houses than others, hinting towards the future of hierarchy on the plateau and Chaco's place in it. They remained for about 250 years until there's a little blip in the climate chart there at about 750 that led to colder weather, and they moved out and another community, along with another community at the northwestern end of Chaco Canyon. Migration and movement, as I said earlier, define the history of Pueblo peoples. Those who left Chaco probably headed for the upper San Juan and the greater Mesa Verde region, where over the next 250 years, people experimented with various ways of living as migrants and natives mixed. The most popular region was the Ridges Basin due north of Chaco. When one family there built a tower, perhaps in a bid to assert authority over others, they were massacred. Not long after that, everyone left the basin, never to return. By the year 1000, though, 3 families had moved back into Chaco, marking the beginning of a new polity in the Southwest that would rival Hohokam in size and influence. One of those families settled on the mesa top at the northwest of the canyon, where the earlier community had left at the same time as the people of Shabak did. Their close attention to the heavens led them to paint images of a large star that may depict a supernova that appeared in 1054 on the floor, and on the floor what could be Halley's Comet in 1066. Note that Tim Hockatet in his book on Cahokia imagines that the leaders of Cahokia used this appearance of the supernova and the comets as a way to sort of impress people and bring them into the Cahokian world. And it's very possible that they played the same role in Chaco Canyon. But in any case, their peoples continued to move in, large families living in no longer big houses, but great houses in the 11th and 12th century, creating, there's about 13 of these really palaces, as Steve Lexton would argue. Now, there are so many books, and so much research, and so many discussions about Chaco and what it's all about that I can't possibly present that material here. So I'm just going to focus on a couple aspects of it. One is the interesting confluence of the image of the Hohokam ball court system and the system of great houses and great house community that spread across this whole region with Chaco. And there's no way to change the focus, it's just the size of the screen, I'm saying. But each of these black sections here is a great house community. All of them here. This is the core of Chaco right here. And so here you've got another large portion of the Southwest unified within, in a very different way, but creating, what something to, as I say, rival what you see in Hohokam. Pueblo Bonito, of course, is one of the first, and in the end, the largest of the pueblos in Chaco Canyon. In this magnificent recreation, you see, the canyon's not very deep if you haven't been there, really. That you've got this huge building with fields where they're growing crops. Out here, they've got water catch, ways that they've stored water along here. And this is just one of 13 or so of big families. And so what I'll concentrate on here is, again, I'm sure the focus is as good as it should be, but you can see there's West Mesa here, South Mesa here. This is Chakra Mesa. Here's Shabakshi down here. And Luigi is the last of the great houses to arrive around, it is built in the early 12th century, and it is directly across from the first settlement in the canyon. So very, very interesting place. And each one of these great house palaces, buildings or pueblos, whatever you want to call them, is oriented to either the cardinal directions, the equinoxes, the solstices, or the greater or lesser lunar standstills. As long as the leading families of Chacos could claim to understand the heavens, I think, they could maintain their role in organizing the Pueblo world. But unexpected droughts in the late 11th and 12th centuries, and maybe even the eruption of Sunset Crater in the area which is now threatened by the tunnel fire, may have played a role in their undoing, as well as some evidence that as Chaco lost some of its prestige, people started leaving, and they used some targeted violence, which only led people to leave even faster, as happened at Bridges Basin. In any case, the Chacoan State disintegrated and people migrated out of the San Juan Basin in every direction. This is a Chacoan great house due north of Chaco Canyon in southern Colorado, a place called Chimney Rock. The site is a natural observatory for viewing the major lunar standstill, a celestial event when the moon rises at its farthest northern point and does so for about 3 years. We're actually in the lunar standstill, the greater lunar standstill right now. And if you go on to the Chimney Rock National Monument website, they're promising to bring people up there, and you can get up there and see the full moon rise right here through that rock, right? And even more interesting, about 10 years ago, a girl at a local high school did an experiment that showed that the news of the standstill could have been communicated to Chaco and Mesa Verde via smoke signals. So linking this Chaco world together around this celestial understanding. A number of great house communities outside the canyon survived in the 12th century after the fall of Chaco, such as Aztec, and if you haven't been to that, it's got kind of restored Kiva down here, and then it's really extraordinary. It's Chacoan, but it's post-Chacoan architecture, and Aztec was there for about 100 years after Chaco as a thriving community. Another one is Wupati, east of Flagstaff, also near where the tunnel fire is still burning. It's a striking example of Chacoan architecture and Hohokam elements, like the ball court at the lower right image down here. The Pueblo faces directly across the painted desert towards the Hopi Mesas. There's also a natural blowhole off the image here at Wupati. It's this volcanic landscape, so there's lots of breaks in the land and under the land. That blowhole may have given rise to a Hopi story about the taming of the god of winds. The Hohokam continued to prosper in the 11th century, but reorganized in the 12th, in part due to an influx of migrants in the wake of Chaco's fall. And by 1300, platform mounds had replaced ball courts as the centers of local communities, and the Hohokam became more inward looking. Most people who migrated away from the Chaco outlier communities headed for the greater Mesa Verde regions, where Pueblo peoples had been living for centuries. Many returned to Mesa Verde itself and settled on the mesa tops, where their ancestors had made the transition from pit houses to pueblos in the early Middle Ages. Something which you can really see for yourself along the Mesa Top Loop Trail on Chapin Mesa. It's wonderful. You just go from one century to the next, and you see the remains of this architectural change, which is sort of at the core of archaeological understandings of Pueblo people. The cliff dwellings were actually a late innovation, and probably, to my mind, had more to do with the need to use every bit of land on the mesa tops, which was where they farmed. But they also signal the reorganization of Pueblo society in the wake of Chaco's fall. This bird's eye map makes it clear that the largest pueblos, like Cliff Palace and Longhouse, were at the centers of communities. When you go to Mesa Verde, you go to a particular dwelling, cliff dwelling, and you hear here's what the people did, here's what they lived in, here's when they went away. But what they never tell you is that it's a part of this much larger set of communities on Weatherill Mesa over here and Chapin Mesa over here. And that's not all. That beyond Mesa Verde to the north on the Great Sage Plain, 300 separate communities emerged after the Chacoan State disintegrated. And then even beyond the plain, where you see this tower community at Hohokam National Monument, and beyond up into Utah and farther into Colorado. These communities thrived until the end of the medieval warm period and the beginning of the Great Migration that followed. Now, Pueblo people didn't disappear in the 14th century any more than they had after the fall of Chaco. They moved on and they reorganized. Many of them moved to the Little Colorado River to a place called Homology. It doesn't look like much today, but it was key to the future of the Hopi and other Pueblo peoples. New ideas encoded in polychrome pottery and institutionalized in the Katsina religion and related forms of religiosity invented at Homology and across down the rim at places like Grasshopper Pueblo and via what archaeologists call the Salado phenomenon, where you get these encoded understandings of this new attitude towards the powers that make it possible to continue to live an agrarian life in this environment. And that movement, in the long run, provided Pueblo peoples the means to resist attempts by Spanish and Anglo-colonialists to force them to abandon their way of life, and why we have their descendants living here still today. So really important. The map on the right, there's two maps here. The one on the right shows where the people who left the Four Corners resettled in the 14th century. So, again, this area is sort of, emptied of people, and scholars have said, archaeologists have said that in fact people could have stayed up in that area. You could still have farmed, certainly maybe 25% of the population, but it was a cultural movement for all of them to go. They decided together to go, so there, so you have this 14th century period here, and then as you move over here, and again, you've got a very vibrant world here along the Rio Grande, and you have some of the largest Pueblo communities ever created in the upper Rio Grande. Unfortunately, and on the right, you have what's the beginnings of what you see the familiar archipelago of Pueblo nations from Taos to Zuni and to Hopi coming into it. Unfortunately, this map is a little misleading because all of these places should be over here too. They're there in the year 1500, so the late medieval history of Hohokam and Mogollon was less bright. The members dispersed after the fall of Chaco into the hinterlands around the valley and south to the Chihuahua Desert, and even farther south to the city of Paquime, the last great city in the medieval Southwest. In the early 14th century, the Hohokam absorbed a wave of immigrants that taxed their ability of the natives to house and feed them. The canal systems were intact, but they simply could not be extended any further. They're bringing water down from the Gila and the Salt all the way here through what's modern Phoenix and even beyond. So there was no place for and again, these two waves of migrants were accepted into the Hohokam society, and they tried their best to integrate, but with changes in the floods and droughts in the 15th century led to mass migration from the heartlands and the highlands, and by 1450, the Hohokam millennium came to an end. Those people did not disappear either, though. any more than the Pueblos people did. They no doubt headed south towards Paquime and other cities like Culiacan in the Mexican Northwest, and perhaps even beyond to Tenochtitlan, the new capital of the Aztecs in the basin of Mexico, the place from which some of their ancestors had themselves migrated to the north thousands of years before. And some no doubt stayed, for the Pima and Hohokam of the Saharan Desert and the related tribes all trace their ancestry back to the medieval Hohokam. Concluding thoughts. Does the history of the Hohokam, Mogollon, and Pueblo people of the American Southwest in the Middle Ages warrant the claim that they were part of an agrarian civilization? Let's consider just one comparative example. Before the 12th century, Northwestern Europe had no centers that could really be called cities. The Frankish king Charlemagne didn't even have a permanent court until he was crowned emperor by the Romans in the year 800. And when he did, he housed it in a rural palace complex near some hot springs, a place that still is never the case in the city today, much of it. Yet the notion of Carolingian civilization gives no one pause. A good deal of cultural activity resulted from the concentration of power and wealth at the Carolingian courts, but so also at Hohokam and Chaco. We know less about them, but they were very clearly bound together by an ascendant religious identity and prospered thanks to their ability to harness the energy of thousands of farming families to a common purpose, just as the Carolingians did. If anything, the peaceful expansion of Hohokam and Chaco could be read as more civilized than the relentless warfare of the Carolingians during the rise and fall of their dynasty. The Middle Ages ended in America and around the world when permanent connections between Afro-Eurasia and the Americas were forged. When the Spanish arrived at Zuni, Southwestern Americans and Europeans entered the early modern world together, for better or for worse. Whatever framework one chooses, the history of the Native American Southwest deserves to be better known. If recognizing it as part of the medieval history of this country and of the world helps that happen, I will have achieved my goal. Thank you.
We're having a library. Thank you so much, Dr. Paxton, for a very rich talk. Questions?
Of course.
Any questions from the audience? Yeah, Nicola.
During your talk, you mentioned many different types of settlements throughout this region. What were the relative populations of those? Was there averages or just or ranges?
Yeah, there, for Hohokam, it ranges from 40,000 to 200,000. No. In the Hohokam, world, if you will. But it's very hard, to tell, to come up with those kinds of figures. It's maybe, it's somewhere within that range for the Chacoan polity at its height, and I'm not as well versed in those numbers when it comes to the late Middle Ages in the Rio Grande region that we're in here.
Other questions? I've heard various theories about Chaco, ranging from it being a center for trade and religious organization to it being a populated city area. I'm kind of getting the impression that it was a population.
There was a population there, and there were people in small villages within Chaco Canyon, and there permanently. The palaces of the leading families were mostly empty of people. The archaeologists think. but they were, you know, people from the Chacoan world were coming to Chaco Canyon clearly for ritual, for participation in ritual feasting and ritual activities, probably arranged around the celestial year, and also labor. That is, you know, you needed labor to build all of those giant Pueblo buildings, and so they were, you know, there's arguments about whether that labor was coerced or it was simply part of the things that people did in order to be part of that Chacoan world. But the idea, you know, the landscape itself and the possibilities of farming in those areas were such that it was best to sort of spread people out.
So it's really complicated all year.
Chaco Canyon was populated all year, all year round by the families. I think the argument about a trade center that doesn't hold water anymore. I think things coming into Chaco were labor and lumber and things like that. And the things that were going out were people who were having their religious sensibilities renewed by the time spent there. Yes.
Does the modern Indians that live in around the area have any oral history that forms that far back?
Yeah, the Navajo have things to say, and the Hopi and the Navajo, as I understand it, remember Chaco as a place where bad things happened. Therefore, we don't want to talk about it. And Steve Lexon has argued that you know, those bad things had to do with you know, some stories about gambling, and there's really very interesting work done on gambling pieces that are there among Chaco remains, and that young people were not paying attention to their elders and other things. So yeah, there's almost too much information, so it makes it really hard. And of course, we're dealing without written sources, so we can't get those things nailed down in the same way. But there's no lack of trying.
Question?
What's the end of your lecture? You mentioned Solano,
Mhm.
and I may have missed it, but would you explain?
Yeah, the archaeologists tend to see a pot and identify it as with a people. And so when you get these polychrome ceramics circulating with this kind of coded language about, you know, that plays with the ideas that are embedded in the Katsina religion and these related forms of religious life, and it spreads down from the Mogollon Highlands into those, you know, those basins, the Stafford Basin and Tonto, and so that's called this Salado phenomenon. It's a phenomenon from my perspective in terms of the transmission of these ideas. It doesn't mark a new group of people moving into a particular place.
Back there.
Where did these people come from?
Originally, there, you know, there were, I mean, you know, there were people in the region, in the Paleo-Indian people and the so-called archaic people. I mean, there were people here, of course, if you talk to the Apache and the Navajo and the Hopi and the Pueblo people, they've always been here. Archaeologists, from a scientific point of view, say, well, no, their ancestors came in at the end of the last ice age and spread through the Americas, and everybody, you know, I mean, we're all in a sense children of Africa, because the first human beings left Africa and spread around the world, and some of those people ended up in the Americas. So we're all one human family,
You want to follow up?
yes, please.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Navajos that
Yeah.
Navajos have the tradition that they came down from the north.
They do. They all,
And with the flat area.
well, they also say that they came out at the confluence of the Little Colorado and the Colorado by the Grand Canyon. So I'm glad that, you know, 'cause that science says, yes, they're, you know, folks who came from farther north and the Apache as well. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so I kind of have a philosophical / ethical question, I guess, but you know, when we're talking about oral history, we're talking about Native communities and how they are culturally guarded with their information, and trying to apply this like Western methodology of like applying the Middle Ages to it, and the archives for Western Western medieval scholars are open to scholars. You know, we get kind of anything you can find. Oh my gosh, great, look at it and see what's there.
Right.
So have you had to like negotiate applying this kind of like Western historical view to a culture, an area that we don't necessarily, like we as white people might not have access to, or, you know, non-natives have access to.
Right.
And being able to understand what happened when we don't have.
Well, I've tried to avoid it the way the archaeologists do, since I follow their lead. That is, I'm not, you know, there's nothing medieval about the people of the medieval Southwest. I mean, we're using the term medieval as a way to create a chronology for the globe, a common chronology for the globe, so that people don't have to lose their bearings by trying to figure out what's exactly happening in the Chinese Empire in the 13th century, and around the globe, and this movement of global history really is behind this. In fact, for me, it's even bigger than that. I taught a course called Big History for 10 years, where I started with the Big Bang, and we did the history of the cosmos, we did the history of our solar system, the history of the life on Earth, and then the history of humanity. Each one, from these very simple beginnings, creating this sort of map of evolution across the universe and in our little planet here. So I'm not dodging the questions, but to say that we're stripping the medieval Europe, the European part, there are no knights in shining armor and all that stuff, away from the meaning of medieval when we translate it out of Northwestern Europe and when we translate it to another place in the world. Just when people talk about medieval Japan, they don't mean the same thing. So that it's still a puzzle, and it would be great, and people do, and many Hopi tales have been published, and there's one can get a handle on some of these things, and more interesting, a lot of archaeologists engage in that kind of thinking as well, and I owe pretty much everything that I've said tonight to those folks, so I honor that.
PBS one time put on an hour show about an astrological architect who went to Chaco Canyon and made this connection between celestial influence and straight lines and all that sort of thing. It was quite interesting. Are you familiar with that, or?
Yes, no, I mean, that's the scholarship that I'm drawing on for this, that particular understanding of the way in which, they turned Chaco Canyon, the buildings in Chaco Canyon, into a kind of observatory. So that each one of them had its place within this order of cardinal directions and solstices and equinoxes, and even this lesser lunar standstill, which is fascinating, and the evidence is there. We don't know exactly what the name is, but it certainly suggests that the leadership at Chaco got its prestige from the ability to forecast and prognosticate what would happen by what they read in the heavens.
I found interesting your comment that populations would grow by peacefully absorbing newcomers. During the climate change and probably accompanying deforestation and changes like that, did that continue, or was there evidence for warfare and battle for scarce resources?
Yeah, there are periods, especially the period of the sort of early Middle Ages on the plateau. There's sort of a lot of sense of warfare that people talk about the Pax Chaco based on the Pax Romana, and saying that for that 150 years or so of Chacoan ascendancy, warfare more or less stopped in the public world. So that suggests that Chaco played the Chaco played a real role there. And then when Chaco broke up, and especially in certain places in the years after the Great Migration, as people are moving around, there's conflict. There's conflict in the Galena as you're moving towards the Jemez Mountains in the late 14th century. There's conflicts up still in the area around the Dolores River in Colorado. So the whole villages that are destroying things. There's less conflict in the Hohokam territories. And Pakime is a very interesting place, sort of on the hinge between Mesoamerica and the Southwest. But it's really it was the site of the first major what's the word natural anyway, people terraced a place at Cerro Wanakenia as long as 2000 years BC. They were there, and that place is in the Casas Grandes Valley, and it's where the city of Pakime then rises. So people sort of start out there, and then some of their descendants move up into the Southwest, and then eventually people come back down, and then they settle there, and then so there's even a bigger world that we one day need to talk about, that is North American history that reaches from the top of Canada down to the Isthmus of Panama, right? So that would come up in those kinds of that kind of a history.
Yeah, you mentioned typing onto that. You mentioned the purple wolf.
Yes.
So, and I guess people returning to the Tenochtitlan, do you believe that there's kind of Mayan Aztec, was it sizable populations moving up and influencing, or is it just betrayal?
Yeah, I don't think there's any evidence for Mayans themselves moving up and bringing the language in, but it's very clear from the evidence and from the members and what some of those things then become part of those late medieval religiosities like the casino religion. That knowledge passed up and passed up just at the time that you get the sort of collapse of the Mayans and the Mayans didn't collapse; they went somewhere else. But I think they went to Central Mexico, and some of them are still there today. Yeah, I'm gonna. When I mentioned, yeah, I did. I was just thinking that the idea was that that the Hohokam millennium ended and everybody was gone, but clearly everybody wasn't gone, because you've got the people and Pima and related tribes saying no, we're still here. Our ancestors, there was a continuity there in spite of the fact that the big agrarian civilization disintegrated.
How would you compare the economic system of the Southwest
I don't. I don't think what's interesting is that civilizations have economic systems, and these people clearly had a very sophisticated economic system. It didn't work the way it did in Afro-Eurasia, but when you're on that supercontinent, you've got ideas that are flowing back and forth from the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic Ocean, and you've got, thousands and thousands of years. If you take human connections, the more connections you can make, the more complicated things can get. Here, the human connections are a little less, right? And again, you don't have beasts of burden, you don't have metal technology, and so to my mind, it makes their achievements all the more kind of stunning. That they are, but we shouldn't use Afro-Eurasian models to judge, let's say, the degree of civilization of Native American peoples. That I think is something that just has sort of gotten into the thinking of colonialists like we all are descendants of, or at least those white people. So I think that rethinking, re-envisioning the Middle Ages in this way is also a way of reckoning with the differences between Afro-Eurasia and the Americas. Yes, sir.
The vision you've given us is that the southwestern area was characterized by peace, settlements, agricultural development, etc. Where is the eastern border of that distinguishes these peaceful, constructive people from the Plains Indians and all of the ones that were following different lifestyles?
Yeah, wow, that's a really good question. I mean, before the Plains Indians got horses, they were very different kind of people, right? And when you get to the late Middle Ages, when you get to the 15th and 16th centuries, and there's a lot of exchange going, right here, right through the gap, past Pecos, Pueblo, right, and Corvera, these places. There's a lot of interchange going in the late Middle Ages and the early modern period between those folks. And again, I don't want to overdo the idea that Hohokam and Pueblo people were somehow peaceful for a particular reason. I think it was the environmental possibilities of their way of life, and when things went well for them, conflict was at a minimum, and when bad conflict arose. So
I find a similar number of settlements in the pre-Hispanic portions of America that are east of here.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, leaving out the horse of the Hispanics, are there a lot of archaeological sites of a similar density in other parts of America?
Daniel Richter has a wonderful in his book America's Ancient Past, but the first chapter is called Legacies of Power from Medieval America and Legacies of Conquest from Medieval Europe. And he goes and shows a map and it shows the Chaco world and then Cahokia in the Mississippi Valley. They really do rise and fall at almost exactly the same time. And they were about as large in terms of the tens of thousands of people who were part of these two big polities, I would say. And so unfortunately, that those two maps leave out the Mogollon and the Hohokam as if they're not there. Of course, they were there at the same time as Cahokia. So that there's some fixing to do there, but we're coming in. It's coming into focus among scholars around the country that we can do a history of this country that begins with the first people to live on the land here. And that's where we should start the history of this country, and we should teach it that way. And that would, I think we're moving in that direction.
We need to wrap it up here, but I do have one question myself, if I can indulge. Because I think it's a broader question. So you've given us the kind of warning signs of comparison too much, maybe, at least in a judgment sort of way, between the Americas and Europe at the same period. But we're still using the term people. And while I think there is I understand the inclination to use a familiar term to kind of give people grounding. I think that's kind of what you're thinking. I also wonder though, if there's a value in upending the system to have a new vocabulary. Because ultimately, medieval and Pax, as you also need to Pax Romana, right? Those are terms that come from a European study of history. So if we are going to talk about things on a level playing field, perhaps, saying that a period is in the middle of something, that it's not really in the middle of, I guess I say
Well,
that, you know,
the middle
what
of-
is it in the middle
Of the ancient and the modern.
Right, the ancient and the modern, but
Yeah.
those don't necessarily align in
Yeah.
the same
No, I
way.
agree.
So I understand, you know, do you have any thoughts on that? Of like,
Well-
are there other vocabularies that are in the recent form? that might be-
Yeah, I mean, from a big historical point of view, looking at the globe, we would say that this is the late agrarian age, right? And the agrarian age begins with the origins of agriculture wherever they originate around the planet, and always different times. Human beings have reinvented agriculture across the planet at various times. And so that agrarian age lasts from about 3000 BC. No, sorry, I think of civilization back to right after the ice melted, and people for the first time in the Middle East settled down to farm. They sort of were playing with farming in before, during the ice age and during the sort of quick little warming up period. And then you have this younger Dryas or something that gets really cold again as people go back to hunting and gathering. Then they come back and they settle down for good. And so that starts this very long agrarian age, which then is followed by, the modern age or the industrial age or the post-industrial age or whatever you want to call it. But that's such a big category that, I wish, I mean, maybe some American historians who are Native American and American historians, will come up with a new vocabulary. I think that'd be great.
I think it's so worthwhile to have this conversation and kind of find the ways that we do have intersections in history throughout the globe. It's so important today. So I just want to thank you so much, Dr. Paxton, for a wonderful talk.